Fresh off a SoCon Regular Season Title and NIT Championship, the Mocs will be hunted this season. Chattanooga Team Preview starts now. SoCon Fast Break continues as we get ready to break down Chattanooga Mocs here in 2025. Darren, we know what Dan Earl's been able to do, not only at Chattanooga, but in the Southern Conference, his previous stint at VMI. And again, we talked about it. This is a team that's going to be hunted.
Absolutely. Anytime that Dan Earl puts a team together, and especially in the Southern Conference, they're going to challenge you. And this group in particular, Chattanooga, coming off a regular season championship and an NIT run where they also won the championship, they are going to be the hunted for sure this season.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even talking with Dan Earl, he had mentioned just from the perspective of winning the NIT championship and how special that was, and that's the first time that we've seen a Southern Conference team play in a postseason championship and then win it. And that was the first time since 1959 when West Virginia was part of the Southern Conference. Wow. And Jerry West played for the NCAA championship there. So a little bit different, but he did talk about just the excitement that you had with the NIT championship. But ultimately, they want to make it to the NCAA tournament, and to get upset the way they did in the Southern Conference tournament in Asheville, while it was disappointing, they were at least able to rebound and get something out of the season.
Certainly. And, you know, for whatever everyone is saying about the NIT being a little bit watered down or maybe not what it is, when you go out and get to compete for a postseason championship,
yes,
that's special. And that means something, and that's program building. To your point, I would be curious if you asked 100 coaches, I'll call it 10 coaches, how many would say I'd rather win the NIT versus go to the NCAA tournament and have a chance to win a game or two? I would really be curious on that, because I do think some might say the NCAA tournament, but I just think this is a really big program booster.
It is. And it puts them on the map. There's no question, even more so. But I do think it's about the NCAA tournament or bust. Yeah. And this is nothing against the NIT. I mean, that organization has been around for a long time. And if you remember, the NIT used to be the top echelon. Yeah. It wasn't the NCAA tournament. And obviously it has grown into something that we relish now, March Madness, all of that. And how many times do we hear from a coaching perspective as far as how their resume is measured? How many NCAA tournaments did you make?
Yep.
That's a big thing that coaches, that's what they strive for. And as players, it's that feeling that you're there, you're in that select group that gets to play in the postseason, in the NCAA tournament, and part of March Madness.
Absolutely. There's nothing quite like it. I mean, I was fortunate enough in 2023 to be a part of that Furman group that went and upset Virginia. And I can just tell you that, I mean, I'm even getting chills right now. There's nothing quite like competing in the NCAA tournament. I do think like the NIT's done a great job, I think, rebranding itself.
That's right.
Doing the final game in Hinkle Fieldhouse, a historic venue in Indianapolis. Great.
Love Hinkle
great
Fieldhouse.
Culture. But there is just nothing quite like having the big lights of the NCAA tournament, 20,000 fans in an arena, and really simply put, being part of one shining moment.
Oh yeah, one shining moment. That is it. And speaking of Hinkle Fieldhouse, when I was assistant at Maryland Eastern Shore, we played Butler and played there. Yeah, so that was a special moment. I wish I would have taken it in more though, and really relished everything there. But you get so tunneled vision in terms of, hey, what can we do to win this game? You don't really get to take everything in.
Absolutely. It's kind of one of those things I think I always had in the back of my mind when I was coaching, to just try to not take some of these big historic venues for granted when you got a chance to coach in one or play in one like the NCAA tournament. But it's so hard when you're in the moment, because you have so many responsibilities. You're thinking about, how are we going to win? What do I need to do for pregame?
I'm worrying about matchups.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, making sure that everything is lined up, ready to go so we can put our best foot forward to win the game. But, you certainly try to soak that in and try to, make that moment as special as possible. And I have no doubt that even though it was a rough way to end their regular season in the Southern Conference tournament against the Furman Paladins, there had to be a very, very magical moment there going out and battling for a number of additional games and coming up with the championship.
Oh yeah, no question about it. And you're talking about a journey in itself, the NIT run that they had, the close games, the overtime games, all of that was something that was very special. And also they had a special season, 29-9 last year, 15-3 in the SoCon. Again, we mentioned it, the SoCon Regular Season Title there. Again, this is a team that even when you look at from Ken Palm's ratings, I mean, they continue to be one of the top teams in the Southern Conference, a mid-major. 110-ish last year, elite offense in terms of adjusted efficiency. And maybe, defense can improve from that standpoint, and tempo, they're not going to run fast, but they can get up and down the court enough.
Certainly. I think one of the big things to your point that you mentioned with Coach Earl's offense is they're going to spread you out.
Yeah.
And they're going to be very efficient. They're not going to beat themselves. They're going to take care of the ball. But to your point, really interesting for them last year. They start off the conference season 4-3, and they certainly had expectations. Their expectation through 7 games was not to be 4-3.
That's right.
And obviously something that they did clicked because they railed off.
They went an 11-game winning streak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And before that tough loss to Furman in overtime in the conference tournament.
Yeah.
So to your point, it was still an incredible year. And, I think a lot to build on, as we talked about a little bit earlier.
That's right.
For this year.
No question about it. And the defining moment, obviously, winning the NIT Championship and a program record 29 wins. That is a special season for certain for Dan Earl and the Chattanooga Mocs. Now, heading into 2025, this is going to be a little bit different because you lose some dynamic backcourt there with the Mocs. Honor Huff going off to West Virginia. Trey Bonham, we know his eligibility was gone. They were the primary ball handlers there, the scorers, that elite offense that they had last year. I mean, it was special. Now, you also, what was crazy is that you had Frank Champion, who was playing lights out and unfortunately was not able to go in the Southern Conference tournament and then even into the NIT tournament as well. But they didn't miss a beat once they got going.
No, they didn't. And it was it came as a little bit of a surprise that they didn't miss a beat because, as you mentioned, Frank Champion was playing very good basketball coming down the stretch at the end of the season. And frankly, my opinion, I think kind of gave them a little bit of a different dynamic because you knew what you had in the backcourt. You knew that Bonham and Huff were going to be your catalysts in that backcourt. And those were tough matchups every single night.
That's right.
But Champion was really kind of becoming the difference maker in the front court. And so obviously that was a big blow. But like you mentioned, they found a way not to skip too much of a beat, making the run that they did in the NIT. So.
That's right. And Honor Huff, I mean, again, some of the shots in terms of playmaking ability, not only being able to drive to the basket, but just being able to pull up from beyond the three. And obviously they were able to take advantage of a lot of offense from beyond the arc.
Well, yeah, and to your point about the offense, they're losing over 2,000 of the 3,000 points that they scored last year.
Yeah.
That is, folks out there, that's not normal to lose 2,000 of the 3,000 points that you scored in a year. So, they've got some big shoes to fill with those two guys being gone.
No question. Well, one of the key returners, though, is Colin Mulholland.
Yes.
Big 6'10", NIT breakout star known as the Big Maple there in Scenic City. I mean, this guy averaged almost 13 points per game in the NIT, and that's versus averaging about 6 points a game in the regular season. Yeah. So you're talking about a guy who stepped up and stepped in to fill that void of Frank Champion not being there. And I don't know if Dan Earl expected to have that type of production from Colin Mulholland.
No, I agree. I mean, when you have the production that he had all year, and then for it to kind of, move into a different gear come postseason time, that was a huge break for them. And credit to Mulholland. I mean, obviously kept fighting, got a little bit more of an opportunity with Champion going down and played really well. And I think it kind of goes along with Coach Earl's historically is in his time as a head coach has had a really skilled big guy that can score, that can pass, that can, in ways kind of help initiate offense in some respects. And so
a la Jake Stevens.
He was okay.
Exactly.
He was okay. So I really expect Colin Mulholland to really even build more off of what he did last year. And frankly, I would expect him to be, if they want to reach their peak, to be an all-conference caliber player in the Southern Conference.
No question. Yes, I think they're going to need somebody like Mulholland to be that steady force, as you're talking about, with all of the production that was lost.
Right.
They need a guy understands Dan Earl's system and has been able to excel in it. And I think Mulholland can be that type of guy. And then can you also have like a Mekhi Richards? Can he also provide some depth? Obviously, the size there and the toughness. And to your point, that's the one thing that we consistently see with Dan Earl. We can talk about the backcourt, but it's amazing what he can do in the front court. In the front court with some of these players.
Yeah, and it's clear he does a good job, and he and his staff do a good job of recruiting for fit, especially with those bigs.
Yes,
because he's always been able to find a guy that can play, a big guy that can play with a high IQ and can really help be a great screener. He's had great shooting big men, guys that frankly are just very skilled all-around players that can have a major impact on the game. And I don't necessarily see that dropping off here for them.
Yeah, and Sean Casano can also contribute as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the guys I'm excited to see is Jordan Friesen, who's a Division II transfer from Pitt State. He was the MIAA Player of the Year last year. And without getting too much into the weeds of Division II basketball, the MIAA is a very good Division II conference. And Pitt State, frankly, has had some good teams and some very good players. And he was a high-level player in that league, averaged 18 a game, six assists a game. So, can clearly score it, can distribute it. And we've talked a ton about the front court, and that will be very important for the Mocs. But they have to replace in some way, shape, or form that backcourt production. And I think Jordan Friesen on paper is a guy that can really certainly do that.
He's definitely one. And you also look at some of the key transfers coming in to Chattanooga. Jakari Johnson, another D2 prolific scorer, averaged almost 21 points per game, 41% from beyond the arc. And I would expect that he's going to be a guy that is set up to replace Huff and Bonham there. Again, especially with that scoring punch that you're going to need for Chattanooga. And then also, I think there's a lot of conversations going on right now. His name's already being mentioned. Teddy Washington Jr. from Southeast Missouri, a veteran guard, known primarily more for his defense, but I think he can get to the basket. Not a great outside shooter, but another veteran type of guy that can almost be a plug-and-play type of player for Dan Earl.
Certainly, and I think one point that you bring up there that's really important is that veteran presence.
Yes.
Right? When you have this much turnover, you do need some guys that can come in that have had a significant amount of college experience. And, I think one thing that really does help, Coach Earl's teams is you mentioned, driving to the basket. They do a great job of penetrating, kicking out to shooters. They spread you out. And so I think, he's a guy that I would think can come in and certainly, as you mentioned, plug and play, help create shots for others. One of which is another guy coming in, Billy Smith, who's a transfer from Bellarmine. Great size.
A-Sun scorer.
Yeah, obviously Bellarmine was not a great team last year, but a guy that can really shoot it, shot almost 40% from three last year. So, we talk about fit and finding and plugging holes. I think that they've done some stuff here where they're going to be able to put themselves in good spots for success with these new guys that they brought in.
Yeah, and I think the backcourt, I think it's going to be loaded in terms of how many guys that Dan Earl can play, as we've just gone through several. And also, don't forget about Sebastian Hartman, Eastern Washington transfer. But this is a guy who was on the German under-18 national team. So again, he's got a lot of experience playing at a higher level of basketball. And so he might not be the scorer, but I do think he can provide some of that balance that you're going to need in terms of the depth and the rotation that Dan Earl wants to be able to utilize.
100%. And was efficient from the field last year. He shot 51%. You mentioned he played on the U18 national team in Germany. So he's got some pro level experience.
Yes.
I suspect he will bring a certain level of toughness in a certain
Dan
level
Earl loves toughness.
Yes.
We do know that.
Certainly. So, and then, I don't know how much you thought to kind of run through some of this, but I think, two freshman names that I'm curious to learn a little bit more about are Josh Bauman and Tate Darner. Darner, the latter, son of Link Darner.
Yes.
Coach's son.
That's right.
Has good size. I agree with you. I think their backcourt's going to be loaded, and they have filled those voids with some veteran leadership. But anytime there's a coach's son that comes in, good size, had a very strong prep career, I'm intrigued to see what he could potentially add to the backcourt. And then with Josh Bauman, 6'9", 220 as a freshman.
Yeah, that's some size.
That's some
coming in
very
as a
legit
freshman.
size that, I would think that if he can grasp the system, 6'9", 220, you just can't teach that.
Oh, no doubt from that perspective. And what's interesting too is just the production that they lost, and can they fill that void? And part of it is, it looks good on paper, but paper don't play.
No.
We don't know exactly how these players are going to mesh and how they're going to come together. Now, again, you would think that they would be able to. We've had some guys that have been in different programs before, so they're already familiar with transferring to a different school.
Certainly.
So can they understand what it takes to pull a team together pretty quickly? But at the end of the day, I mean, it's still a little bit of a mystery.
No, it certainly is. And I think you and I have talked about this before, and I think that this has kind of become a bit of a running theme, throughout the last couple of years, is it takes longer now to, one, build the chemistry on a roster, and two,
no doubt.
It takes longer to get going at times as a team. I think we're a little bit more susceptible to teams that we think are going to be good in the preseason, maybe having a couple bumps in the road early on or later than maybe we would historically thought, because it is so hard to get those guys to mesh together.
Yeah.
No matter how good you are.
Oh, it definitely is. And again, I think there's been something that we've seen Dan Earl. He's been able to do that over the years. And so that obviously bodes well that he has that type of experience. And again, now college basketball is so different. All these coaches are learning. It's trial by fire. They're getting the experience. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad.
Right,
We don't know how it's going to go. But also don't forget about Brennan Watkins coming in. I think that can add some depth there at point guard. The North Dakota State transfer there. Now, when you look at what we were talking about, Dan Earl, and the motion offense and what we've talked about, I mean, when you're looking at adjusted offense efficiency, this guy does a phenomenal job. I mean, they're typically for sure in the top 50, top 30 from that standpoint, and they just continue because they have these guys like the Honor Huffs, the Trey Bonhams, and if you got some of these guys, Jakari Johnson and Teddy Washington Jr. coming in, and the Billy Smiths, I mean, these are guys that can continue that type of playing at a high level and high clip from an offensive standpoint.
Absolutely. I think, you hit the nail on the head there. I think one of the calling cards for Coach Earl's offenses is that they do a really good job spacing the floor. And when you do a really good job spacing the floor and you have guys that can penetrate to the rim, and you're able to spray, it makes it a whole heck of a lot easier for shooters when you've got long closeouts. They know where to be. There's good spacing. Their feet are set. And Coach Earl just does a very good job teaching that and instilling that into his offensive philosophy. And they're just rarely going to beat themselves, and they're going to generate good shots. Like you said, they're not going to get into a track meet with you. But they will play fast.
Oh, that's right. If they need to, they have the ability to, at least what we've seen in the past.
Yes, absolutely. But their ability to generate open shots, they can be very, very difficult to guard without having to overcomplicate their offensive scheme.
Yeah, no question. And then when you even look at the backcourt production and the aspect of how quickly can they mesh, we talk about the non-conference, and obviously that's when you want to start working things out because it's all about conference. in the Southern Conference in terms of, hey, you need to be able to set yourself up for that opportunity to have a high seed going into Asheville.
100%. I mean, I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I know at least in 2023, we talked about the need to really be the number one seed because of the track record of the time of day that you play versus just historically the last time a non-number one seed had won the conference tournament championship. Now, obviously, we had that change last year.
That's right. Yes.
But the Southern Conference typically has been very top-heavy from the perspective of the top seed or the top 2 or 3 seeds put themselves in a significantly better spot to be able to go win 3 days in a row in Asheville.
Yeah, and that's why I like when these coaches will go out and now I know there's a financial aspect in terms of some of these games you have to go play. I get that. But also you need to be able to get a better gauge and evaluate your team. And I know it might not be able to translate 100% into conference play, but can you play some of the higher level type teams, but also maybe even not so much like the Power Fours, SEC, ACC, but can you play in a high mid-major type of game to be able to get a better gauge of what your team is?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. The opportunity to go get battle tested early.
Yes, battle tested. That's the word.
I think it really sets you up well for league play. Just because you're going to get into a moment, there's no doubt you're going to get into a moment in conference where you're either up a couple or you're down a couple, and you absolutely either have to score or you absolutely have to have a stop.
Yeah.
And if you've gone to your point and played a really high level mid-major game or a couple of them, chances are one or all of those games were tight and they were a big time atmosphere that puts you in the mode to build and to grow so that when you get into that moment in Southern Conference League play, the moment's not too big for you and you know what you can get out of your guys. And frankly, as a coach, there's a comfortability in that.
All right. Okay. One of the things that we did notice about this non-conference schedule for Chattanooga is the unique perspective here early on in November, going out West Coast, you play St. Mary's on November the 7th, and then you turn around and you play at UNLV the next day. I don't know how many times I've seen that back-to-back games. Now, yes, back-to-back games, but in the same location, not where you're traveling again.
100%. I mean, you're playing 2 games in less than 24 hours, and unless I'm missing something, you're going to have to get on a plane after you play St. Mary's to fly to Vegas. Yeah, I mean, this is something it's certainly not what we normally see at this level. It'd be one thing maybe for some of the low major programs where they're just playing the bye games because they absolutely need to make sure that they're generating revenue for their athletic department. But even then, that's
an interesting one. Yeah, that is an interesting situation right there. And then even looking at some of the other games that they're non-conference, which I love the SoCon ASUN challenge. I love that opportunity. We just talked about it. Can you play some teams that within your same level, that battle tested type of opportunity, as they'll play at Florida Gulf Coast there, and then also have a home game against North Alabama. Again, I think this is something that mid-major conferences should do across the board.
Yeah, I agree. I think scheduling has become really difficult too for mid-majors.
It has.
Especially the better you are.
Yeah.
So for a program like Chattanooga, there's not going to be a ton of high major programs that are going to be knocking on your door to come and play them. So to your point, I love seeing mid-major conferences working together to try and provide, two games here in this case for each school where you can get, like you mentioned, really good mid-major basketball.
No doubt. And they'll also, Chattanooga will play in the Coke Zero Classic, which they have done in the past, Tennessee Wesleyan and Tennessee State. And what's unique about this is that I had heard Dan Earl talking about Colin Mulholland, who we obviously highlighted earlier, the Big Maple, and how it was at the Coke Zero Classic last year, those games, that the light bulbs seemed to go on for Mulholland, and he started to really understand how he could fit in that offense and obviously fit with that Chattanooga team.
Yeah, well, it certainly clicked.
Yes.
Certainly clicked at some point.
It definitely did. Now, obviously, he made his big run postseason, but it seemed to be that started setting him up, getting more comfortable and understanding, what type of player he could be. Because that's part of it too. I mean, these players got to figure out how they fit into these systems, especially when you're talking about all the transfers coming in.
No, certainly. And, I think one thing that you bring up too is while you certainly want a handful of really competitive high major atmosphere, whether it's a mid-major game or not, but bigger atmosphere, bigger tests, you do want to be able to provide opportunities for your guys throughout that non-conference season where you can allow your guys to maybe feel a little less tight, a little bit more comfortable in a scenario where, maybe you're bringing in a team that's looking for an opportunity to go play at a place like Chattanooga. And, I think, you provide a really good opportunity for those guys to step out of their own skin a little bit and feel themselves out.
Yeah. What's also interesting with all of the transfers that happen in college basketball now, there's going to be a time where you're going to play against the team that you transferred from. And sure enough, Chattanooga does this twice, playing Southeast Missouri there in December, on December the 6th. So Teddy Washington Jr., it's going to be his day, I guess, there. Yep. And then also on December 17th, Billy Smith, transfer from Bellarmine, there at Bellarmine. So it's going to be interesting to see how those guys play going back to their old stomping grounds.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is something that rarely happened, 5 or 6 years ago or before. And now, I mean, if we went through every team in the country, there's probably 6 degrees of separation of where some guy played going back to, his alma mater to play the next year or vice versa. So it's a really interesting dynamic, though, because we joke around about it a little bit, but there's a different level of pressure and a different feeling.
Oh, no doubt.
If you're going up against your former teammates, especially a place that you've been at for a number of years.
And where you have excelled. Yeah. And both of these guys excelled at both of those respective schools. And I know back in my day coaching and even looking at like what Dean Smith used to do, Roy Williams, and so many other coaches did also, but I just remember distinctly, it was talked about significantly with Dean Smith that players that he recruited, he would try to schedule a game as close as possible to that recruit's hometown. Yeah. And so the family members, everybody could see, that person play for North Carolina. And now I don't know if this is happening where they're going to take you back if they're scheduling on purpose like this. I doubt that because I think to your point, scheduling is so much more of a challenge these days, and especially for some of these mid-majors. But I remember when I was assistant at Fairleigh Dickinson and got the job at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, wouldn't you know, the very first game of the season, Maryland Eastern Shore had to go to Fairleigh Dickinson. And so I had to play against the old team, or coach, I should say, against my old team. So I understand what these guys are going to be feeling.
Well, the nice thing is you had some inside information you can share.
But that's the pressure, though.
Certainly, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
What's the best way to break down Tom Green's offense here? And so a lot was on my shoulders from that standpoint. But also, I'm looking over at Coach Green as well, and he knows I know some of this information. Yeah. So there's a little bit of apprehension on both sides there. And also another game that I'm excited about is that you have some of these mid-major programs in some of these hoops giving festivals, the holiday hoops giving there against Auburn, December 13th in Atlanta. I think it's a great opportunity.
It is. I mean, I think as much as maybe we all don't want to admit it, when you're in a mid-major program and you get the opportunity to go play a high major program, you get a little bit different level of oomph and kind of juice to that game because you want to go prove that you're good enough.
That's right.
And frankly, whether we want to admit it or not, I know this one's at a neutral site, but it's a big crowd. It's a big game. It's a big moment. There's something there's a little bit more pageantry to it. And so these are fun opportunities. But, from the basketball side, it is a great opportunity to go test yourself and kind of see where you're at. And I actually really like the time of year that they're playing this game because you've been able to get a month or so under your belt of games
Yes.
and start to get a feel for what your team is like, and you start to get a little bit of a feel for what your rotation is going to be. And so this is a well-timed high major opponent game, because I do think that they will have been able to have gotten some of the kinks out throughout that first 4 to 5 weeks of the season.
For sure. All right, so here's our big question for Chattanooga heading into this 2025 season. We know they lost a lot in the backcourt, and that was a big part of why they were able to make that NIT run. But can a breakout star emerge? Can it be Colin Mulholland there? What about the transfer portal? Can they reload with a Teddy Washington Jr., a Jakari Johnson, and also Billy Smith, those type of names? Can they be the type of players that Dan Earl, can he seamlessly integrate these players into his system and have the pieces there to maintain that championship type of level?
No, I think you bring up all great points. I think we're starting to see that the first year that a new transfer comes in, I think there's some data now that's starting to kind of show this. It's not always an easy first year when you transfer to a new program. In other words, your stats don't always correlate that first year.
Right.
Now, there's usually, if it is the right fit, there's usually a pretty big uptick in year 2. But sometimes it doesn't always click immediately that first year. So I think, to your point, can this group of mostly new players with a handful of guys, like you mentioned, like Mulholland, who hopefully can take that next step, who have the institutional knowledge, can that group blend together?
Yeah. And
really, especially that backcourt, can they replace that backcourt to put themselves in a situation to be right back, 1, 2, or 3 in this league? I think they can, but it's no small task.
That's right. Well, the coaches, they think they can, just in terms of Chattanooga was voted number 1 in the coaches poll. So I think there's already a feeling, at least on paper, this looks like another championship level type of team for Dan Earl. So my question, what's the floor for Chattanooga?
I just, based on, again, we're on paper here, and they roll them out for a reason, and they play the games for a reason. But I based on coaching talent level that appears to be coming in, and I think a faith in Coach Earl's ability to build a roster, I just don't see the absolute floor of this being worse than a third place finish. I really don't.
I was going to say maybe second.
Yeah.
I mean, third would be, there's an injury that has happened to one of the major contributors, because I just think Dan Earl has a template, and we consistently see it. And that's one of the things that is a marker of a really good coach, a great coach, elite coach, however you want to describe it, is that it's almost a rinse and repeat type of thing, regardless of who you're bringing in. Now, I know at the end of the day, it is about the Jimmies and the Joes. You've got to have the athletes. You've got to have high IQ basketball type of guys, all of that. But I think Dan Earl, to your point, he's been able to identify guys that just fit into that system much more seamlessly than others.
Well, I think to your point, and to kind of even add on to it, to speak his praises, he's had 2 of the last 3 years now. He's had significant injuries to important players, and they've been able to weather the storm.
That's right.
3 years ago, they lose Jake Stevens for the vast majority of the conference season, and they make a run to the conference tournament championship game against Furman. And, last year, as we talked about, they lose Frank Champion. What do? They go on and win the NIT. So I think there is a track record, as you say, of Coach Earl just knows how to build a roster and plug guys into the right spots and coach them up to where things fit and work.
Yes, and obviously the easy answer for the ceiling is a SoCon tournament championship.
Correct.
I mean, they've got the roster, at least on paper. They've got the head coach. They've got the experience. They've got all of that. And I think this could be a team, if it blends well and they're able to really get going and peak at the right time, this is a team that make it to the NCAA tournament And there's a lot of teams that would not want to play Chattanooga.
No, I think it's interesting. I think the Southern Conference historically has played teams tough in the NCAA tournament. And I think some of that style of play, I mean, Southern Conference, historically has been an offensive-oriented league. Teams that can really score the basketball.
Yes,
and
guard-oriented.
Yeah, very guard-oriented, very offensive-oriented. And to be honest, a lot of times we talk about it. What wins the NCAA tournament? Really strong guard play.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I think if this is a team that clicks and goes out and wins the league, I can't imagine that they're going to be a welcomed matchup to an opponent in the NCAA tournament.
What will be very interesting, too, is based on what we've talked about with Chattanooga, if they don't get the automatic bid, based on how the season was going, could there be an outside chance of an at-large bid? Because we know Southern Conference, historically, we've seen it. It's a one-bid league. Get all of that. Now, I still contend that there's definitely been some years where I felt there could have been two teams that made it to the NCAA tournament. So that would be interesting to see. Could this be a team if something crazy happens? Because one thing we do know, though, in Asheville, I mean, all bets are off, Darren. I mean, who knows with some of these games?
Yeah, we can go down the list of how many years back. There's always at least one big upset in Asheville. I would love to see more of these mid-major conferences that are elite in a particular year with two teams. I would love to see them get more than one bid. The optimist in me wants that. I think the realist in me says that. Man, I mean, unless they go like undefeated and lose in the SoCon championship game, it's so hard and it's frustrating at times, but it's so hard for these mid-major leagues to get two bids. But I would agree with you overall. There have been a number of years, if you go back the last 10, 15 years, there have been a number of years where you can make a very good argument to say there are two teams in this league
no doubt,
that are good enough to play in the NCAA
tournament.
tournament.
We're going to speak it into existence.
I love it.
All right, here we go. Let's do it. That's what we're going to do right here on SoCon Fast Break, because I do believe that Chattanooga will be one of the top 100 teams in KenPom ratings at the end of the season and also will contend for a Southern Conference championship. That is the Chattanooga team preview right here on SoCon Fast Break. Make sure you subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, including the iHeartRadio app. Until next time, may all your jumpers hit nothing but the bottom of the net.